Just a footnote point. I think it was interesting that they started with a quote from Dutton attacking Judith Butler for her reference to what post-structuralism is, giving a sentence about post-structuralism. Most people's professional documents from engineering, from computer science, are unreadable to people outside of the profession, but for some reason, academics who deal with culture, this is judged against them, while physicists, computer programmers, doctors, just about everybody else, financial analysts, can speak in jargon that the majority doesn't understand, and it's not held against them. That is something curious. I think we should really think about why is that. Why can you turn on CNBC and just hear people speaking jargonistic terms that most people won't understand? As for what Butler is saying, it's actually very simple. And it's kind of obvious if you take the time to read it. She's saying that in the middle of the 20th century, there was a Marxist movement that saw that capitalism as a concept was a universal structure, a constant structure. Capitalism always was capitalism, and that it formed society in a certain way continually, okay? It was a static entity. The fact that it was capitalism made it work the way it is and made society the way it was, and that there was really no point in viewing history, okay? Butler is pointing out that in the postmodern period, in the post-structuralist period, we actually realize that our world is unique, that history is important, and that there are accidents and circumstances that make one time different than another and one society different than another. And we don't look for one universal principle that governs and explains everything, but that we realize that our world is the product of history, accidents, even personalities, and that we don't have an all-inclusive structured model. It's actually in the words, and they're probably taking a fairly educated person with a bachelor's, even in a different discipline, a few minutes of just explaining it to go through it. Whereas, here's something else. I am building an N-tier server farm to service web-based HTTPS requests for document management systems. In order to do that, I need to do a load balance cluster using sticky load balancing to improve sufficient performance for 5 front-end sticky balance clusters. In the middle tier, I have an application tier server. But since I'm using Microsoft SharePoint 2010, I can now cluster application servers for search into multiple server clusters rather than being stuck with one. Of course, as we all know, SQL Server backend clusters have to be passive-active. So I'm doing an active-active-passive backend cluster to deliver resiliency and DR sufficiency. I'm using a third-party product to back these items up on tape and taking the tape away in time. Okay? UI design is going to be managed mostly with Ajax and CSS, okay, in line with the latest version of the 2010 product, okay? Oh, also there'll be an API release really giving all the functionality to web services so developers can create mashups that link up to it. I actually say that sentence at work every fucking week. Most of the people who I work with have absolutely no understanding what it means. It's a perfectly coherent sentence, but if I was to write that down and put that on a wall somewhere, people would be like, oh, you know, smart guy, you know? You put something up about trying to understand culture, trying to understand the influence of media and culture. The way our cultural defense is that's nonsense. I didn't understand that thing that historian wrote, so they must be stupid. Whereas, wow, that guy who's talking about molecular biology might be smart. I'd also point something out, that the ideals of, say, Althusser are still being taken seriously and criticized. The thing about sociological socioeconomic, sociopolitical, and philosophical ideals is compared to the brief lifespan, say, in science, and the almost instantaneous thing in which things become redundant in technology. You're actually talking about ideals that have a fairly long-standing period and are fairly important. The thing is that it is just written into our popular culture that thinking about culture in anything other than just common sense means, basically everybody just wants to make money, is looking out for themselves. Movies are there to be funny. We live in a culture where technological thinking is taken to a really, really high elevation, whereas cultural thinking is not even there. What's interesting about movies like the original Matrix is the fact that there's a technical expertise that we can all grasp, and a lot of science fiction, good science fiction writers, and the later Matrix movies are not good science fiction, realize this, that by using the technical metaphor, they can sugarcoat thinking about society. And that's a key area. It's called the fetishization of our culture. We can't think about our relations with one another. We can't think about our society, but we can think about things. And if an artist wants to talk about society, he's best off doing it by presenting an image of things. Oh, and the review's pretty good as well.